The millionaire ignored his wife until at the party she wore a short dress, and he burned with jealous. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let me take you right back to our main character and the strange silence that wraps around her like a shadow. Elena Moore had never expected to feel invisible on her wedding day, but that was exactly how it began. When she married Adrian Blackwood 6 months earlier, she thought she understood what she was signing up for. She knew he was powerful and wealthy, a titan in the investment world towering over skyscrapers and breaking deals worth millions of dollars. But she believed that beneath his tailored suits and icy demeanor there might be a heart capable of warmth. She was wrong. From the moment the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian had never looked at her with anything other than polite disinterest. He attended social events clutching her arm like an accessory rather than a partner, yet his eyes never truly saw her. When photographers snapped pictures at charity galas or business launches, Elena stood beside him like a shadow, a presence known but entirely unremarkable. And still, she smiled, tried to fit into the life she agreed to share with him, hoping that maybe one day he would glance at her and see something more than a name on a guest list. Yet the silence lingered like a cold whisper in every luxurious room they occupied. On that night, the night of the party that changed everything, Elena walked through the grand doors of a glittering ballroom dressed in a simple yet striking short dress that hugged her silhouette with quiet confidence. The gown was not extravagant or designed to steal the spotlight, but something about it made people pause, made eyes trace her outline as though they were seeing her for the very first time. Glasses clinked and muted conversations rippled through the crowd as she stepped onto the marble floor and walked toward a distant cluster of guests laughing beneath crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume, but what clung to Elena more than anything else was the anticipation of being noticed. It had been months since she felt truly seen by anyone who mattered, and now even strangers seemed to recognize a spark in her eyes that had long been suffocated by silence. Unbeknownst to her, across the room in a sleek midnight suit, Adrian Blackwood watched her approach with a tightening in his chest. He had not expected his breath to catch like this, nor had he anticipated that something as simple as the way her dress brushed her knees would ignite a slow burn of jealousy deep within him. For the first time since their marriage, Adrian felt something unfamiliar and dangerous stir behind his calm blue eyes, and it anchored him to the spot, as Elena moved through the crowd with an effortless grace that made every whispered compliment and curious glance land like gentle thunder around her. I could feel the temperature shift as she drew closer, an invisible current pulling him towards something he could not yet name. And as Elena stepped into a circle of familiar faces laughing at a joke she did not hear, Adrian felt his pulse quicken with a realization that terrified and exhilarated him all at once. No one had ever made him feel this unmoored, not with declarations or temptations or flirtations, but simply by being seen in a way he had never bothered to see. And in that moment, amid swirling laughter and flickering candlelight, everything about Elena Moore changed in his eyes forever. She was more. Elena had learned quickly that life as Adrian Blackwood's wife was built on quiet rules that were never written down. There were no raised voices, no obvious cruelty, just a steady absence that pressed against her chest like thin air at high altitude. Their penthouse overlooked the city from nearly 60 floors above the street, all glass and steel and clean lines, but Elena occupied only a small corner of it, a guest room converted into something politely called her space. Every morning she woke before Adrian, listening to the distant hum of traffic miles below, and moved through the apartment without leaving a trace. She brewed coffee she never drank, folded blankets that were already straight, and dressed in soft neutral colors that did not demand attention. Adrian left early, always before sunrise, a brief nod replacing what might have been a kiss, his phone already pressed to his ear as he stepped into the private elevator. He never asked where she was going, and she never told him that some days she walked 5 blocks just to sit in a public park and sketch strangers, pretending she still belonged to a life where choices mattered. The marriage itself had begun as a transaction wrapped in silk. Elena had met Adrian through a legal intermediary who spoke in calm tones about discretion, appearances, and timelines. There were clauses about public events, clauses about privacy, clauses about what would never be expected of her. She remembered signing her name with a steady hand, telling herself that stability was not the same as happiness, but it could feel close enough. At first, she tried to earn his attention in small, careful ways, asking about his day, leaving notes on the kitchen counter, choosing dresses she thought he might like. Each attempt dissolved into the same polite distance, the same quiet thank you followed by silence. Over time, Elena learned to stop trying. At public events, she became an expert at standing half a step behind him, smiling when addressed, speaking only when spoken to. People assumed she was shy or aloof, and Adrian never corrected them. In photographs, she looked composed and elegant, but if you watched closely, you could see how her eyes searched for something just out of reach. The loneliness was not loud, but it was relentless, a slow erosion that made her doubt her own presence. Still, she told herself she was not weak. She had chosen this, and choice carried dignity. On the night of the party, that dignity wavered. She almost stayed home, fingers resting on the zipper of the short dress as she stared at her reflection. It felt unfamiliar, bold in a way she had not allowed herself to be since before the marriage. The mirror showed a woman who looked awake, not hidden, and the sight frightened her. She could have changed into something safer, something that would let her disappear as usual, but a quiet voice inside her whispered that disappearing had cost her enough. When she arrived at the ballroom alone, the music washed over her, and she felt every glance like a soft brush against her skin. For once, she did not shrink. She moved through the space slowly, deliberately, and with each step, the invisible weight she carried seemed to lift. She did not notice Adrian at first. She was too focused on the strange sensation of being present, of existing without apology. But across the room, Adrian noticed everything. He noticed how people turned their heads as Elena passed, how conversations paused and resumed at a different pitch. He noticed the way she stood straighter, the way her laughter sounded unguarded. It unsettled him, this version of his wife that did not wait for permission. Something tight and unfamiliar settled in his chest, and he told himself it was irritation, that it would pass. Yet as Elena spoke to a man she had never met, smiling in a way Adrian had never seen, the feeling sharpened. He realized, too late, that the rules he had built so carefully had never prepared him for this moment. Elena was no longer invisible, and for the first time, Adrian Blackwood was afraid of what that might mean. The imbalance between them had always been obvious, but that night it became impossible to ignore. Adrian Blackwood was used to power flowing toward him without effort. In boardrooms, men twice his age leaned forward when he spoke, pens hovering, waiting for his approval. His name alone could open doors, close deals, and redirect entire careers. Elena saw that power every day, not in grand gestures, but in small certainties. The way staff members straightened when he entered a room, the way conversations adjusted their tone around him. In their marriage, that power translated into control so subtle it felt invisible, and Elena learned to live within its quiet boundaries. She never questioned his schedule or his absences, never asked why Victoria Hale always seemed to be standing a little too close at events, never challenged the assumption that his world mattered more than hers. She had convinced herself that being chosen, even as an afterthought, was still a kind of security. But standing in that ballroom, she felt the weight of the power gap pressing down harder than ever. Adrian belonged to this world effortlessly, while she existed on its edges, tolerated but not acknowledged. As she spoke with a young investor who complimented her dress and asked about her interests, Elena felt a strange mixture of guilt and relief. It was harmless conversation, yet it felt like crossing an invisible line she had not known existed. Across the room, Adrian watched, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He told himself that Elena was playing her role poorly, that her attention should be focused on supporting him, not engaging with strangers. But another thought slipped in, unwelcome and sharp, asking why it bothered him at all. He had never cared where she directed her attention before. He had designed the marriage to be clean, efficient, free of emotional entanglements. Yet now, seeing her laugh softly at something another man said. He felt something dangerously close to loss. Elena sensed his gaze before she saw him. When their eyes met, the air between them seemed to still. There was no anger in his expression, no accusation, just a flicker of something unreadable that made her breath catch. She did not look away. For once, she held his gaze, not defiantly, but steadily, as if testing whether he truly saw her now. The moment passed quickly, swallowed by the noise of the party, but its echo lingered. Elena excused herself from the conversation and moved toward the balcony, needing space to think. The city lights stretched below like a field of stars, distant and cold. She rested her hands on the railing, feeling the smooth metal beneath her fingers, grounding herself. She had not come here to provoke him. She had come to remind herself that she existed beyond the quiet corners of his life. Behind her, footsteps approached. Adrian stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could sense his presence without turning around. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled, asking whether she was enjoying herself. Elena answered honestly, saying that she was. The simplicity of her response seemed to unsettle him more than any accusation could have. He hesitated, as if weighing words he was not accustomed to choosing carefully, then remarked that she was attracting attention. There was no compliment in his tone, no warmth, just observation. Elena turned to face him then, meeting his eyes with a calm she did not feel. She told him that she had not realized attention was forbidden. The words were quiet, almost gentle, but they landed between them like a challenge. Adrian did not respond immediately. He had no prepared rule for this, no clause to cite. The power he wielded so confidently elsewhere faltered, and for the first time, Elena saw uncertainty flicker across his features. Without another word, she turned back to the city, ending the exchange on her terms. Adrian left moments later, returning to the crowd with a tension he could not shake. Elena stayed on the balcony a little longer, letting the cool air steady her racing heart. She did not know what this shift would mean or how it would change the fragile balance of their marriage, but she sensed that something fundamental had cracked. The rules she had lived by no longer felt absolute, and somewhere deep inside, she knew there would be no easy return to the silence they had both relied on. The drive home from the party was silent, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows like something distant and unreal. Elena sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers that came only after the adrenaline faded. Adrian drove with his usual precision, eyes forward, jaw set, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Neither of them spoke. The quiet between them was no longer familiar or safe. It was charged, humming with words that had not yet found a shape. When they reached the penthouse, the elevator ride felt longer than usual, the soft instrumental music pressing against Elena's ears. She stepped out first, slipping off her heels near the door, her bare feet meeting the cool marble floor. Adrian paused, watching her for a moment before moving past her without a word. In the kitchen, Elena poured herself a glass of water she did not drink, staring out at the dark skyline. She replayed the evening in fragments, the glances, the questions, the way Adrian had looked at her on the balcony, as if seeing her for the first time and resenting the fact that he had missed so much. She told herself she should feel satisfied, but instead there was a knot of uncertainty in her chest. Attention, she realized, could be just as unsettling as neglect. Adrian retreated to his office, the door closing softly behind him. Inside, he loosened his tie and sank into his chair, staring at the city he usually commanded. With ease, the image of Elena laughing, standing in that short dress, lingered in his mind with an intensity he could not shake. It angered him, not because she had done something wrong, but because it made him confront something he had avoided since the beginning. He had wanted a marriage without complication, a partnership defined by convenience and control. Tonight, that illusion cracked. He found himself wondering who Elena had been before him, what parts of her he had dismissed without noticing. The thought unsettled him more than any business risk ever had. The next morning unfolded with a strange tension that neither of them acknowledged. Elena moved through the apartment as she always did, quiet and careful, but something had shifted. When Adrian entered the kitchen, she did not rush to adjust her routine to accommodate him. She finished her coffee, gathered her bag, and mentioned she would be out for most of the day. He nodded, the automatic response slipping out before he could stop himself, then frowned when he realized he had not asked where she was going. Hours passed. Adrian attended meetings, signed documents, issued instructions, but his focus wavered. He caught himself glancing at his phone, expecting a message that never came. Elena spent the day wandering through the city, moving without urgency. She visited a small gallery she had always loved, standing before a painting that reminded her of a life she had put on hold. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined solely by Adrian's shadow. That evening, they found themselves in the same room again, the quiet heavier than before. Adrian mentioned an upcoming charity gala, one that required her presence. The words sounded like an obligation, not an invitation. Elena looked up from her book and asked calmly whether he wanted her there, or simply needed her to fill a role. The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, the answer not as obvious as it once would have been. He said that it was important for appearances. Elena nodded, accepting the response without argument, but something in her eyes dimmed. Later that night, alone in her room, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, considering the boundaries she had lived within for so long. The party had not been an act of rebellion, but it had revealed a truth she could no longer ignore. Being unseen had protected her from disappointment, but it had also erased her. Across the apartment, Adrian stood at his window, watching the city pulse below. He told himself that nothing had changed, that this tension would settle back into routine. Yet deep down, he sensed that the inciting moment had already passed. The balance they had relied on was gone, replaced by something fragile and unpredictable. Neither of them knew what would come next, only that the distance between them now felt like a question demanding an answer, and that question would not remain unanswered for long. The days that followed unfolded with a careful slowness, as if both Elena and Adrian were moving through a space where every step mattered. The upcoming charity gala lingered between them like an unspoken agreement, a reminder that their lives were still bound together by expectations neither of them had fully questioned until now. Elena prepared quietly, attending fittings arranged by Adrian's assistant without protest. The dresses presented to her were elegant, conservative, designed to blend seamlessly into the world Adrian inhabited. She chose one without comment, yet something inside her resisted the return to invisibility. At the same time, Adrian found himself watching her more closely, noticing details he had once dismissed. He noticed how she paused before answering questions, how she seemed to measure her words as if weighing their cost. He noticed the way she carried herself now, a subtle confidence that had not existed before the party. It unsettled him, this awareness, because it suggested a depth he had never bothered to explore. In the evenings, they shared the same rooms without truly sharing space, passing each other like careful strangers. Elena would sit at the far end of the couch reading, her legs tucked beneath her, while Adrian reviewed documents, his attention drifting despite himself. Sometimes he caught her glancing up at him, not expectantly, but as if studying a puzzle she had decided not to solve. At the gala, the tension sharpened. The venue was grand, a restored historic hall with vaulted ceilings and sweeping staircases. Elena arrived beside Adrian, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the practiced image of unity intact. Yet beneath the surface, everything felt different. Conversations flowed around them, donors and executives greeting Adrian with familiarity, their eyes flicking toward Elena with renewed interest. She responded with polite warmth, answering questions about her background, her interests, speaking with an ease that surprised even her. Adrian felt the pull again, that tightening in his chest when another man laughed too easily at something she said. He told himself it was nothing, that he had no claim to her attention beyond the contract they shared. Still, his gaze followed her across the room, tracking her movements without conscious thought. Elena sensed it, the weight of his attention, and it made her pulse quicken. She did not seek it, but she did not retreat either. For the first time, she allowed herself to occupy space without apology. When a guest asked her to join a small group near the balcony, she agreed, leaving Adrian momentarily alone. He watched as she stepped away, the distance between them stretching, and felt an irrational urge to close it. He joined another conversation, but his responses were distracted, his thoughts fixed on the sound of her voice drifting across the room. Elena leaned against the balcony railing, the cool air brushing her skin. The city spread out below, lights shimmering like distant promises. She listened as the group discussed art and philanthropy, topics she cared about deeply but had rarely shared. She spoke about community programs, about how small investments could change lives, and she felt something stir, a sense of purpose she had buried long ago. Unbeknownst to her, Adrian stood just inside the doorway, listening. He had not known this side of her, had never asked. The realization struck him with uncomfortable clarity. He had reduced her to a role and missed the person entirely. When Elena turned and saw him, surprise flickered across her face, followed by something softer, unreadable. He did not interrupt or claim her attention. He simply nodded, acknowledging her presence in a way he never had before. The moment was brief, but it lingered, charged with possibility. Later that night, as they rode home in silence once more, the distance between them felt different. It was no longer empty. It was full of questions, of unspoken realizations. Elena stared out the window, her reflection merging with the city lights, and wondered what it would mean to be truly seen, and whether she was ready for that risk. Adrian sat beside her, the weight of his thoughts heavy, realizing that jealousy was not what unsettled him most. It was the dawning awareness that he might lose something he had never bothered to understand. As the car pulled into the garage, neither of them spoke, but both sensed that the slow burn between them was building towards something inevitable, something that would demand more than silence and carefully maintained distance. The turning point did not arrive with raised voices or shattered glass, but with a moment so quiet it almost slipped past unnoticed. It began a week after the gala, on an ordinary evening that should have felt the same as all the others. Elena returned to the penthouse just after sunset, her coat damp from a light drizzle, her mind still echoing with conversations from the day. She had spent the afternoon meeting with a small arts nonprofit, offering advice and ideas she had not realized she still carried. The experience left her both energized and exposed, as if she had opened a door inside herself that might never close again. Adrian was already home, standing near the kitchen island with his sleeves rolled up, an unfamiliar sight. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was something different in his expression, a hesitation that felt out of place on his controlled features. He asked where she had been, the question simple but unexpected. Elena answered honestly, telling him about the meeting, about how it felt to contribute to something that mattered. She did not embellish or seek approval. She simply spoke. Adrian listened, truly listened. The realization struck him with a quiet force. He had never known this version of her, never allowed space for it to exist. As she spoke, he noticed the way her eyes lit up, the way her hands moved with subtle confidence. It was the same spark he had glimpsed at the party, now unmistakable. Something shifted inside him, an awareness that what he had ignored was not insignificant but essential. He asked a question, then another, each one tentative, as if he were learning a new language. Elena answered cautiously at first, surprised by his interest, then more freely as the conversation unfolded. The distance between them narrowed, not physically, but emotionally, and it unsettled them both. Later that night, as they sat at opposite ends of the couch, Adrian broke the silence with an admission that surprised even him. He said that seeing her at the gala, speaking with others, had unsettled him. He did not use the word jealousy, but it hovered between them, heavy and undeniable. Elena looked at him, her expression calm but searching. She told him that she had not meant to unsettle him, that she had only wanted to feel real again. The honesty in her voice cut through his defenses. For the first time, Adrian confronted the cost of his detachment. He realized that his fear had never been of intimacy itself, but of losing control. Watching Elena step into herself had threatened that control, revealing how little authority he truly had over what mattered. The conversation did not resolve everything. There were no promises, no declarations. Instead, there was a fragile understanding that something fundamental had changed. Adrian acknowledged that he had treated their marriage as a transaction and that doing so had allowed him to ignore her humanity. The words were difficult, measured, but sincere. Elena listened, her heart pounding. She had waited so long to be seen that now she was unsure what to do with the attention. She told him that being invisible had protected her, that it had been easier than hoping for more. The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. That night, they retreated to separate rooms as usual, but sleep came slowly. Elena lay awake, replaying the conversation, wondering whether this awakening would lead to healing or heartbreak. Adrian stood by his window, staring at the city, the image of Elena laughing at the gala replaying alongside the quieter moments of their conversation. He understood now that jealousy had been a symptom, not the cause. It had awakened him to the possibility of loss, to the reality that Elena was not an object to be possessed, but a person who could choose to leave. The next morning, a small but significant change occurred. Adrian left a note on the kitchen counter, not an instruction or a reminder, but an invitation. It was simple, asking if she would join him for dinner that evening, no agenda attached. Elena found the note after he left, her fingers brushing the paper as if it might disappear. The invitation was not an apology, not a declaration, but it was a choice. She stood there for a long moment, heart racing, aware that accepting it would mean stepping further into uncertainty. As she folded the note and slipped it into her bag, she sensed that the story between them was no longer moving along a predetermined path. The quiet turning point had passed, and ahead lay a question neither of them could avoid, whether awakening would lead to connection or simply reveal how far apart they truly were. The fragile calm that followed Adrian's invitation did not last long. Elena accepted the dinner quietly, telling herself that one meal did not rewrite months of silence. Yet a cautious hope settled in her chest despite her efforts to suppress it. That evening, the penthouse felt different, charged with expectation. Adrian arrived home earlier than usual, his jacket draped over a chair, the table set simply but deliberately. They ate together without the presence of staff, speaking about neutral things at first, the food, the city, the weather, each sentence carefully chosen. For a moment, it felt like the beginning of something gentler. Then the outside world intruded, as it always did. Adrian's phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with a familiar name. Victoria Hale. Elena noticed the pause, the fraction of a second where Adrian hesitated before turning the phone face down. The gesture, meant to be discreet, landed harder than any interruption. The warmth that had begun to build between them cooled instantly. Elena felt the old ache return, sharp and unwelcome. She asked, her voice steady, whether there was an emergency. Adrian answered that it was business, nothing more, but the explanation felt thin. Elena nodded, pushing her plate away, appetite gone. The conversation faltered, and the dinner ended sooner than planned. That night, Elena lay awake, the ceiling a blur above her, realizing how easily hope could reopen wounds she had worked so hard to close. The next days brought a subtle escalation, small moments compounding into something heavier. Adrian found himself pulled back into old patterns, meetings running late, phone calls taken behind closed doors. He told himself it was necessary, that he was balancing responsibilities, but the tension between him and Elena grew with each missed opportunity. Elena, sensing the shift, withdrew again, her defenses rising instinctively. She returned to spending long hours out of the apartment, immersing herself in work with the nonprofit, finding solace in spaces where she was valued for who she was, not who she represented. Adrian noticed her absence acutely, the quiet in the penthouse feeling different now that he was aware of what it concealed. The breaking point came at another public event, smaller than the gala, but no less significant. Adrian was required to attend a high-profile business reception, and Elena accompanied him as expected. The atmosphere was formal, restrained, but the undercurrent of scrutiny was unmistakable. Elena wore a simple dress, elegant but unassuming, her confidence quieter now. Throughout the evening, Adrian was repeatedly drawn into conversations with Victoria, their proximity noted by others with knowing looks. Elena watched from a distance, her chest tightening with each shared laugh, each whispered exchange. She reminded herself that she had no claim, that jealousy was not hers to indulge. Yet the pain was real, undeniable. When a guest approached Elena, offering conversation and a polite escape, she accepted, grateful for the distraction. Adrian noticed too late. The sight of her engaged with someone else reignited the jealousy he thought he had begun to understand, twisting it into something more volatile. He excused himself abruptly and crossed the room, his expression controlled but his eyes dark. When he reached Elena, his voice was low, asking her to step aside. The request was not gentle. In a quiet corridor away from the crowd, the tension finally surfaced. Adrian accused her of sending mixed signals, of confusing him, the words sharp despite his attempt at restraint. Elena listened, her face composed, then responded with a clarity that surprised them both. She told him that confusion was the result of inconsistency, that she could not keep opening herself to him only to be reminded of how easily he returned to old priorities. Her voice did not rise, but each word carried weight. Adrian tried to explain, citing obligations, responsibilities, but the excuses rang hollow even to his own ears. Elena met his gaze and said that she could not continue living in a state of conditional visibility, where she mattered only when it was convenient. The statement struck him harder than anger ever could. Without another word, Elena walked back into the reception, leaving Adrian alone in the corridor. The distance between them, once quiet and manageable, now felt vast and undeniable. Adrian returned to the event, but his focus was shattered. He realized with a sinking clarity that he was standing on the edge of something irreversible. Elena, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with a calm resolve, aware that this confrontation had changed the trajectory of their relationship. She did not know whether it would lead to separation or transformation, only that she could no longer accept half measures. As the night drew to a close, both of them carried the weight of that realization, understanding that the next choice Adrian made would determine whether the awakening he had begun would deepen into change or collapse into regret, leaving their fragile connection beyond repair. The quiet climax arrived without warning, settling over the penthouse like a held breath. 2 days passed after the reception without conversation. Elena moved through the apartment with a deliberate calm, packing a small overnight bag and leaving it by the door, not as a threat, but as a boundary. Adrian noticed it the first night and said nothing. The second morning, he found himself staring at the bag as if it were an ultimatum written in fabric and zippers. He went to work and returned early again, the city dark outside the windows, the apartment unusually still. Elena sat at the dining table, a single envelope placed neatly in front of her. Inside was the contract they had signed months ago, its pages marked with quiet certainty. Adrian stood across from her, hands resting on the chair back, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. The power he once relied on felt useless here. Elena did not accuse or plead. She simply told him that she needed clarity, not promises, not explanations about business or obligations, but a decision. She said that she could not continue as a placeholder in her own marriage, appearing when required and disappearing when inconvenient. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, and that was what made it so devastating. Adrian listened, the words pressing against him with undeniable truth. He realized then that every attempt to control the situation had only pushed her further away. He took a breath, the kind he usually reserved for negotiations that could cost millions, and made a choice that felt both terrifying and necessary. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the table, sliding it toward her. He told her that he had canceled his standing arrangement with Victoria, reassigned projects, and cleared his schedule for the foreseeable future. The gesture was simple, almost understated, but it carried weight. Elena did not reach for the phone. She looked at him instead, searching his face for signs of performance, of another calculated move. What she found was uncertainty, raw and unguarded. Adrian admitted that he had been afraid, not of losing control in business, but of failing at something he could not quantify. He said that seeing her with others had awakened him to how easily he could lose her, and how little right he had to feel entitled to her presence. The admission hung between them, fragile and sincere. Elena felt her resolve waver, not because she was convinced, but because she saw the cost of his honesty. Still, she did not soften immediately. She told him that change could not be proven in one night, that trust would require consistency, not gestures. Adrian nodded, accepting the terms without negotiation. He said that if she chose to leave, he would respect it, and if she stayed, it would be as a partner, not a symbol. The quiet that followed was different from all the silences they had shared before. It was not empty. It was full of possibility and risk. Elena stood, lifting the overnight bag from the floor, her movements unhurried. Adrian watched, heart pounding, unsure whether this was the end or the beginning. She walked past him toward the door, then stopped. Without turning, she told him that she would not leave tonight. But that staying did not mean forgiving. It meant allowing space for change. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, the weight of relief and responsibility settling over him at once. That night, they did not share a bed. They shared something more precarious, an agreement built not on contracts or appearances, but on choice. Elena lay awake in her room, listening to the distant sounds of the city, aware that she had reclaimed something vital. Adrian sat in the living room long after the lights were off, the echo of her words replaying in his mind. He understood that the quiet climax was not about grand declarations or dramatic reconciliations. It was about a decision made in silence, a willingness to let go of control and accept the vulnerability that came with genuine connection. As dawn approached, both of them sensed that whatever came next would demand patience, honesty, and courage. The path forward was uncertain, but it was finally shared, and that uncertainty carried a promise neither of them had expected to feel. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm that neither Elena nor Adrian tried to name. There were no dramatic changes, no sweeping declarations, only small shifts that carried more weight than any promise. Adrian began coming home at reasonable hours, not announcing it, simply appearing while the sun was still up. Elena noticed without commenting. She continued her work with the nonprofit, leaving early in the mornings, returning with a lightness that had nothing to do with him, yet changed the air between them nonetheless. They spoke more, not constantly, but honestly, sharing meals that felt less like obligations and more like pauses where they could breathe. Weeks later, another public event arrived, unavoidable and anticipated. This time, Elena chose her own dress, something elegant but true to herself. As they entered the venue together, there was no rehearsed distance, no performance. Adrian walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. When conversations pulled him away, he returned without prompting, his hand finding the small of her back as if it belonged there. Elena felt the difference immediately, not as triumph, but as validation. Across the room, familiar faces watched with curiosity, sensing a shift they could not quite define. Victoria was there too, observing from a distance, but her presence no longer carried the same charge. Adrian acknowledged her politely and moved on, his focus unwavering. Elena noticed and said nothing, letting the action speak. Later that night, as the crowd thinned, they stood together near a window overlooking the city. Adrian asked Elena if she was happy, not as a test, but as a question he genuinely needed answered. Elena considered it carefully. She said that happiness was not a fixed state, that it was something built through choices made every day. She told him she was willing to keep building, as long as she was not building alone. Adrian nodded, understanding the weight of her words. The ending did not arrive with a kiss or a confession, but with a choice reaffirmed. Weeks later, Elena received an offer to lead a major initiative with the nonprofit, one that would require travel and independence. She brought the letter home, laying it on the table between them. Adrian read it, then looked up and told her he was proud of her. He asked what she wanted to do. The question itself was the surprise. Elena smiled, realizing that this was the measure of change she had needed all along. She accepted the offer. Life continued, imperfect and evolving. Their marriage no longer resembled the contract it once was, but it was not a fairy tale either. It was something more honest, built from moments of awakening, jealousy transformed into awareness, power tempered by vulnerability. The story did not promise permanence, only presence, and sometimes that was enough. As you reflect on Elena and Adrian's journey, it becomes clear that the heart of this story is not about wealth or jealousy, but about visibility. About what happens when someone realizes too late that ignoring the person beside them costs more than any deal ever could. Love, when it comes, is not always loud. Sometimes it begins with being seen, truly seen, and choosing not to look away again. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the quiet choices that shape our relationships, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that explore love, healing, and the courage it takes to change. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful transformations happen in silence.